Transmitter device activated. Coordinates set for Earth 2.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Earth 2 podcast, your weekly exploration of the DC Comics multiverse and the legacy of their Golden Age characters through the Silver and the Bronze Ages of comics. I'm Peter Watson.
And I'm David Steele. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to do a lot of talking today.
So unlike you.
I know. Listeners, we have reached the end of 1974 in our journey, which means it's time for the long hinted at and long threatened Atlas Seaboard Comics episode.
Woohoo!
Gosh. What is Atlas / Seaboard Comics, David? I hear you cry. Well, Atlas Comics was a short-lived comic line founded by former Marvel Comics publisher Martin Goodman, who had left Marvel in 1974 after selling it to Cadence Industries. Peter, do you remember when Marvel Comics used to say a division of Cadence Industries Corp in the bottom of their indica?
I have no memory of that at all.
You don't remember that?
No, I don't remember that at all, no.
I used to always like that bit. So,
okay.
Before I do any more talking, Peter, Atlas Comics, do you remember when you first came across an Atlas comic? Do you have many in your collection?
Yes, I have a full run of all the Atlas comics apart from 2 issues of Vicky.
Who gave you at least one of those issues of Vicky?
That would be yourself.
Oh, see, he's good.
There we are. The first time I came across Atlas Comics was actually when I was in primary school. And remember wet intervals?
Yes.
Yes. Basically, listeners, when we were at primary school, if it was raining outside, bad weather, whatever, during our playtime, we would not be allowed to go out.
That didn't happen in my school.
No?
We were out in all weathers.
Gasp.
Yep. It made it easier to play two-man hunt because you could pull your hood up and hide in plain sight.
Well, we had a better school than that, so yes.
maybe because we were in Fox Bar, we were a bit higher up and out. I don't know. Maybe the climate was slightly different in Clydebank.
Maybe. But what happened then was you got to stay in the classroom, but you didn't do any work. Instead, they opened up this drawer, and inside the drawer, there was just a massive pile of comics. And there was some great stuff there. There was like World's Finest 100-pagers in there. There's also a lot of UK comics, but I remember there was an issue of Iron Jaw there as well.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I think that was the first time I came across it because it was weird because it looked like a Marvel comic, but it wasn't. It just seemed to be this bizarre barbarian kind of character. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I read it once. The World's Finest one I read till it fell apart, but I think I'd read Iron Jaw once then. But that was the first time I came across it.
Interesting.
I didn't see another one until I was in my teens, and it was in a random street market in Argyle Street. Someone had some comics there, and there was a Wolf the Barbarian there.
Okay.
Yeah, that was how long it was. It was at least 10 years in between seeing the next one. What about yourself?
I'm not really sure, to be honest. I remember when I started reading Comic Book Marketplace in 1998. I was thinking 1998, 1999 is a bit of a renaissance in my particular comic fandom after a couple of years of Doctor Who getting all my attention. And there was an issue of Comic Book Marketplace which had a cover feature on the Atlas Comics, and they used the cover of Planet of Vampires issue 1. And I'm guessing it must have been around that time that Pete Root would have had a couple in his 50p bins. I think the first couple I bought were a couple of issues of Planet of Vampires and a couple of issues of The Brute. And then a year or two later, there was a really good issue of Comic Book Artist, which had lots of interview details, which I'll come back to, actually. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure when I decided to start sort of actively collecting them all. You and I sort of almost did a bit of a race for a while, and we were both sort of nabbing them at the same time. Because I was very flush at the tail end of, I think it was 2022, I think it was. I bought all of the issues of Vicky. I'm not going to say how much a couple of them were, but combined they were more than I paid for my copy of DC Comics 100-pager number 5, Love Stories 1971.
Wow. Okay.
But yeah, like yourself, I've got everything else. Listeners, I'm toying with the idea of posting the covers of every single comic on Facebook of an album, but I don't know if I will. Maybe just put a few sample issues up, but we'll see. So Atlas Comics then. I mentioned there, Comic Book Artist. If you can get a hold of issue 16, which is dated December 2001, John B. Cook's phenomenal comics fanzine. I've actually referenced it before. I think I referenced it when we did a 100 Pages episode. That has a lot of really good interview material with a lot of people involved. You can probably get it on digital, I'm sure, from Tomorrow's Publishing, but I would encourage you to seek it out anyway, because everything you ever wanted to know, but were afraid to ask. Basically, when Martin Goodman left Marvel, a promise was made to keep his son Chip involved in the management and executive sort of side of it. Basically, that promise wasn't kept. And it's basically sort of anecdotally held that Martin started this whole publishing venture as an act of revenge, sort of backing up his son.
Yeah.
But, you know, he'd made quite a lot of money out of selling Marvel. Maybe he was getting a bit bored. He just thought, I can try this because Comics are in quite a sort of state of flux at this point.
Yep.
The Comics Code was relaxing. People at Neil Adams were agitating for more creators' rights and stuff. So there was a lot going on. It was an interesting time. And from the start, Martin Goodman offered not only to return artwork to artists, their pages and stuff, but also he offered more money than the big two, i.e. DC and Marvel. And this also had the effect that the big two themselves, very soon afterwards, almost within weeks of their first Atlas Comics appearing on the stands, also started to return art and increase the terms and benefits available to their artists, because there's anecdotal evidence of people who are working for Atlas literally standing outside of DC Comics and sort of stopping people going in and saying, no, you should go up there.
Wow.
Go to this address and see how you go on. So there was a fair bit of competition, and Comic Book Artist issue 16 says that there was quite a lot of, in the comic fan press at the time, in the summer of 1974, there was quite a sort of big hype building. There was quite a lot of excitement from people because Martin Goodman had announced he was doing this, and people were really wondering what they were going to see. And reading about it, it kind of reminded me of, in a way, of the launch of Image in the early 90s.
Very much so.
But that was different because that was obviously a creator-driven initiative. You know, the big lads all stepped away from Marvel or whatever and decided to go out on their own. So I remember a similar sort of thing, there being a lot of anticipation for Image Comics. And from the start, Atlas attracted a number of established big names, and a lot of creators who were quite early in their career who had gone to greater prominence. In no particular order then, Pablo Marcos, Pat Broderick, Michael Fleischer, who we've obviously covered a lot of his work recently on our show, Mike Sikowski, Frank Springer, Rich Buckler, David Anthony Kraft, Archie Goodwin, Wally Wood, Steve Ditko, Al Milgram, Alan Weiss, Ernie Colon, Neil Adams, Dick Giordano, Bernie Wrightson, Russ Heath, Mike Plug, Alex Toth, Jerry Grandinetti, another friend of the show, Tony Isabella, Steve Skeets, Mike Friedrich, Larry Hammett and Klaus Janson all did work at times for Atlas Comics. Some of them maybe just did covers, some of them helped out with interiors, but it was quite an all-star cast working on the stuff. Atlas had a line of black and white magazines very much in the Warren mode, but we're not going to talk too much about them because we don't really do black and white magazines. But the type of comics that Atlas ended up publishing reflected the sort of stuff that DC and Marvel were doing, with a slightly stronger emphasis on violence and just general grimness.
Yeah.
I was flicking through a few things, and it's really surprising how many of the lead characters either kill people or eat people or Planet of Vampires is like, it's almost like, who's going to die this panel at points?
Right, okay.
There's a kind of grottiness to a lot of it as well.
Sure, yeah.
So there's some brilliant stuff, but there's equally some really excruciating stuff.
Right.
So the first Atlas Comics went on sale in November 1974, and the final offerings from Atlas made it to the stands in June 1975, so they weren't around for long. And don't worry, listeners, we're not going to do every single issue of every single Atlas comic, although it's a thought. Maybe once Peter and I have completed the Earth 2 project and done Challenges of the Unknown and Dial H for Hero and everything else we've talked about, maybe we'll do maybe someone else should do every issue of an Atlas Comics podcast. Maybe it isn't already.
Maybe.
As I say, the genres they covered are pretty much what Marvel and DC were doing at the time. They were superhero and adventure titles, including the Phoenix, Morlock 2001, the Scorpion, the Brute, who was basically the Atlas equivalent of the Hulk, except he killed and ate children. The Cougar, who sort of evolved out of an idea someone had to license Kolchak the Night Stalker from the TV show.
It's so weird.
And the phrase Night Stalker is even used on the cover of issue 1. There was the Destructor, another superhero, and of course there was Tiger Man, but we're going to come back to him. They published a few Warren Western titles, including Western Action, starring Kid Cody, Blazing Battle Tales featuring Sergeant Hawk. Which sounds a bit like...
Yeah. Wow.
And Savage Combat Tales, which featured Sergeant Striker's Death Squad. Yeah.
Yes.
I remember using at least one of their covers on the Instagram comic cover challenge in the past. There was a title Peter alluded to earlier called Vicky, which basically reprinted strips from comics published by Tower Comics in the 60s, and that which was obviously trying to cash in on the sort of Archie sort of vibe.
Yeah.
There were a few sword and sorcery comics as well, quite a few of them. We will be covering an issue of one DC sword and sorcery title before too long. We'll probably talk a bit more about what DC was doing in that area in a few months. There was Iron Jaw, which Peter obviously mentioned earlier on. There was Wolf the Barbarian, who Peter also mentioned earlier on. And amusingly and confusingly, there was another comic called Barbarians, which also starred Iron Jaw. So What we really needed was another comic that along those lines that both of them could have featured in. Would
Yes.
they have met eventually? Is the question.
The Savage Swords of.
Yes,
Yeah.
Savage Sword of Wolf, guest starring Ironjaw.
Yep.
There was one issue of a martial arts comic called The Hands of the Dragon. 3 issues of Planet Vampires, which I mentioned earlier, which, like the Cougar, came around because it was cheaper to start Planet the Vampires than to license the rights to do a comic based on the Omega Man, which obviously was a film starring Charlton Heston.
Yeah.
Atlas also had some other horror-flavoured comics. There was one issue of Fright, which starred the son of Dracula. 3 issues of The Grim Ghost, sort of like a cross between Damon Hellstrom and the Spectre. And even had the phrase son of Satan on the cover of issue 2, which is quite blatant, isn't it?
Oh, how egregious.
Those stories are fascinating. They really are. It's like they paint the devil almost as sort of sympathetic, sort of like mentor figure of this character. They're really, really interesting.
Wow.
Tales of Evil featured the Bog Beast.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they're Swamp Thing, Man Thing analogue. And there was a comic called Weird Suspense, which starred someone called the Tarantula. Come back to him later as well. There's also one issue of a comic entitled Demon Hunter. For further variety, there was another book called Police Action, which featured Lomax of the NYPD and another character as backup support, who we'll come back to in a moment. Now, in the short time that they were actually published, quite a few of the series, they sort of flipped or were rebooted almost within moments of starting, refocused and changed. And reading them, it's very interesting. The Scorpion and Phoenix and Morlock 2001, they all sort of shifted in emphasis quite dramatically.
Yeah.
The Scorpion one's particularly interesting because it almost like in issue 3, it goes from being Howard Chaykin's sort of moody sort of spy thing to just a generic superhero. And it's almost this sense that they're trying to, if I'm being charitable, sort of create a legacy character out of nothing.
Okay. Sure.
It's fascinating. Yeah. There's also a series that began as being called Target, spelled Targit, and just very much a kind of rough and ready, no costume in sight adventure sort of guy that quickly turns into John Target Manstalker, and he gets a superhero suit with a nice sort of target on his chest.
Superb.
Now, listeners, if you've been paying attention, you've probably spotted a couple of character names that Atlas have in common with some DC characters. Most obvious is the Tarantula, aka Jonathan Law, one-time regular of Star Spangled Comics and future member of the All-Star Squadron. Issue 3 of The Destructor features a baddie called the Huntress who looks an awful lot like Thundra, you know, who kicked out the FF for a while.
Yep.
Imagine Thunder with just like a kind of blue face mask.
Uh-huh.
And obviously the Grim Ghost was the name given to the Sensation Comics character, the Gay Ghost, once the colloquial use of his sort of descriptor sort of evolved over the years. And the DCU has had a few Scorpions in its time, obviously. We might do a Scorpions episode one day if we run out of ideas, but who can say. But earlier on, I mentioned Police Action and its backup feature, which actually, interestingly, evokes another DC name with a long legacy that we've spent a bit of time on very recently.
It most certainly does.
Yes. So, listeners, for your entertainment this week, we're going to now read the second story from issue 1 of Police Action, which stars Luke Malone, Manhunter. Now, interestingly, this book was published on December the 3rd, 1974, 9 years to the day after the release of Rubber Soul with the Beatles, and Peter is now going to tell you about the cover to Police Action number 1.
In the top left corner, we've got the Atlas Comics logo with the Atlas Comics banner in red across the top, approved by the Comics Code Authority. Number 1, February 25 cents. Then we have the headline, the title of this comic. Police Action featuring Lomax, NYPD, and Luke Malone, Manhunter. And the main image in the cover, you've got Lomax of the NYPD kicking down a door because he's trying to rescue a woman who's being held hostage. She's lying in the front.
It's Gwen Stacy, look.
It does look like Gwen Stacy, but my goodness, they've taken this copying to an extreme. So she's got tape over her mouth. She's in a ragged red dress, this blonde girl. She's looking fearful with big blue eyes. And the two guys that are holding her hostage are firing at Lomax as he's kicking down the door. One's blasting away with his shotgun. The other one has been shot by Lomax. Good grief.
Yes, you can see the smoke from the barrel of Lomax's gun. Lomax, he's into it.
Yes. And Lomax's backup is right behind him, a uniformed cop with his cap at a slightly jaunty angle. Yes.
I love the seedy detailing of it. You can see the cracked plaster around the door frame and the lamp.
Yeah.
That's sharing some illumination. It's very exciting.
And also on this cover, we have an inset circle featuring Luke Malone, Manhunter himself. It's just a close-up of his face. Imagine a teddy boy version of John Constantine, except he has a bit of a quiff going on.
Very vivid red hair. Interestingly, he's lighting a cigarette.
Mm-hmm.
So that tells you that he's tough as nuts or something.
Of course.
It's very interesting.
It's the 70s.
And this cover's drawn by Larry Lieber, Stan Lee's brother, who was also on the staff
Oh, well.
of Atlas Comics, which is fascinating. And again, I'll refer you back to Comic Book Artist issue 16 for more details on that. So we flip past Lomax of the NYPD. Our scene is set with a nice shot of the Golden Gate Bridge with a full moon behind it, and an inset shot of Luke Malone, Manhunter, with his little kiss curl, again lighting a cigarette. He's obviously chain smoking. And our story is narrated by this new iteration of Manhunter. Make sure you add them to your chart, listeners. It'll be in a different colour, maybe in brackets.
Number 15 or 16, I think,
Not
on
sure.
the list.
Is it one of Paul Kirk's clones and he got a new haircut or something? I don't know. Anyway, and this story is narrated by Luke Malone, Manhunter, and he sets the scene.
It isn't paradise, but it's my city, San Francisco. From its seedy slums to chic Nob Hill. I love it. I'm an ex-cop whose private investigator's license reads Lucius G. Malone, but only my mother could get away with calling me that. So, cousin, if you gotta call me Luke Malone, Manhunter.
The rest of the page is taken up with an image of a very sad-looking fellow. It looks kind of like Robert Shaw in Jaws to my eyes, actually. Lying in a heap in an alleyway. There's some more captioning from Luke Malone.
When I quit the force, I rented an office till the roaches drove me out. Now I work out of Paddy's pub. I was there tonight when Andy the bartender took the call and handed me the message. The little champ's been wasted in Hyde Street. Hurry!
And when it comes to the title of the story, which is in broad red letters above this poor dishevelled soul that's lying in a gutter, and the title of this adventure is
Requiem for a Champ.
And we get a little credit box that tells us the story was brought to us by
Artist-writer Mike Plug, inker Frank Springer, editor Larry Lieber.
We get some more captioning from Luke Malone.
He was a harmless unknown, an old panhandler who never so much as swatted a fly off his rum-soaked hide. Yet somebody blew him away in a very professional manner with a submachine gun.
Yes, we can see evidence of bullet impact on the wall behind the champ. First panel of page 2. There's a lot going on. There's a police photographer taking a photograph of the body. There's an older senior police officer with white hair and a cigar talking to a younger officer. Other cops buzzing around taking it all in. Senior cop, who was having white hair, is wearing a long green overcoat, a very neat sort of olive coloured tie. He is Brody. He's kind of in charge, and Brody's talking to a young cop as he says, "You mean this old duff was around for years and nobody knows his name? This part of Frisco crawls with unknown bums. You get to where you don't even notice them." And off camera, a voice yells,
I know them.
and at that, our hero arrives on the scene, and as Peter said, he does look like a kind of a ginger teddy boy version of John Constantine. Brody, still with a cigar or cigarette in his mouth, says, "Malone, I should have guessed. A friend of yours, no doubt."
Stow it, Brody. He was a little champ.
"And what, drinking?"
Look, nobody machine guns a derelict for no reason. This man had a past, I tell you.
"Don't bust my chops, Malone. This is police business. Interfere, and I'll run you in."
Okay, don't get unglued. It's just that him and me, we carried each other home from time to time.
And with that, we see the little champ's body being hoisted into the back of an ambulance as a crowd of onlookers observe.
The little champ's lady was Annie, an ex-burlesque queen, who now cleaned up the discotheque below. I wanted to break the news to her myself.
We see Malone walking up a flight of stairs. You can see a neon sign behind him. You can see a doorway that he's approaching, and what looks like is that a milk bottle or just a jar or something tipped over in front?
Yeah.
He opens the door, enters, saying,
Hey, Annie, are you here?
and then he exclaims,
What the?
because we can see a couple of shady-looking characters that seem to be in the process of turning the room over. And one of the lurking bad guys grabs a chair and with a crack breaks it over Malone's back in the first panel of page 3. Malone fights back with a swack sound effect. He punches the other bad guy in the face, elbows the stripy shirt, beanie hatted wearing assailant, the one who hit with a chair, who goes, "Ugh!" Malone he's good at this. He grabs the guy who's in the previous panel got him round the neck and flips him over his head onto the table with a thud. This prompts this guy to yell, "Get him, Mondo!"
I'm coming!
says his mate, grabbing a stick, and he swings for Malone in the next panel, saying,
So long, sucker!
there's a crack sound effect as he manages to strike Malone in the back of the head. Malone exclaims,
Ugh!
and there's a bit of a slow dissolve. Malone is now in the company of a very attractive, ditzy-looking blonde lady and a rather dumpy, much older-looking woman. The blonde girl is saying, we came up when we heard. Are you okay?
I'll live.
The older lady speaks this time. Who were they, Malone?
Never mind, Molly. The champ. He's been shot. He's dead.
Oh, no! Molly reaches up to grab Malone's coat, and already we should point out the inaccuracy because earlier on he said she was called Annie. Not to worry. Molly grabs Malone's coat, saying, You're wrong. You're mistaken. Not my little champ.
Sorry, Molly.
Blonde girl and Molly sit down on a battered-looking green couch in the next panel. Molly continues, The champ. He was all I had. Malone's going through some paperwork on top of a dressing table here, and he's saying,
Wonder what they were after. What could a derelict have that's worth stealing?
Look, Malone, he was no bum. He was a champ.
What was his real name, Molly?
I don't know, Malone. All I can tell you is he gave me this ring. She holds up a piece of jewellery that's obviously on a string. It says, Lightweight Champion 1940. We was engaged. She cries a bit more. Malone puts an arm around the shoulder of the devastating blonde girl in the next panel, saying,
Take her to my place tonight, Jill.
Sure, I'll stay with her. And then you see Molly putting the ring away and having another little cry, saying, He never hurt nobody. There's a slow dissolve.
If he was a champ in 40, Goldie Glover would know about him, right down to the size of his sweat socks.
And we see Malone outside a gym, because we know it's a gym because there's a sign that says gym. And then inside we can see another chap hanging on the side of a boxing ring. He's a very seedy looking guy, big shades, receding hairline. Luke Malone says,
Hey, Goldie, got a minute?
For you, Malone, anytime.
Trivia question, Goldie. Lightweight champ, 1940?
Let's see, sure. Randy McNally. Friends call him Atlas. Quite a story about him, but just a sec. We see that Goldie is attending to one of his boxers. Got a towel on his head. He continues in the next panel. Randy's manager, Sam Ruffino, was a mob man. He arranged for Randy to fight a real cream puff, but the mob gave Sam 100 G's for the kid to lie down in the second round. A lot of mob money was bet. The odds against Randy were 10 to 1. You can see the boxers sparring in the next panel as Goldie continues. But McNally's wife and Ruffino bet 100 G's on Randy to win. He did. The mob lost and Ruffino ran off with the money and the dame.
Yeah, I remember now. They were using a getaway boat that blew up in the harbour. There was no trace of the bodies.
Right, and no one's seen them or McNally since. With that, we see one of the boxers falling through the ropes of the ring, very amusingly. There's a slow dissolve.
So McNally ends up in the city morgue after all these years, but why? Why was he dusted?
Malone's back outside the gym here. We see him flicking a cigarette. In the distance, a man in a green suit stands under a lamppost, carefully and casually and surreptitiously reading a newspaper. Malone moves off in the next panel, and it looks as though the guy in the green suit is following him. Malone says,
Uh-oh, looks like I just picked up something I could live without. A tail.
The next panel looks obviously ducked into an alleyway or something to let the guy in the green suit catch up with him. With a thump, he punches him in the stomach, saying,
Okay, Mac, this is the end of the line.
End of the line, obviously, being that fantastic single by the Travelling Wilburys.
Certainly, yes.
Malone reaches down, searches the pockets of the guy in the green suit, saying,
Now to see where you fit in all this, friend.
Pulls out a piece of paperwork in the final panel of this page, and using his lighter, he reads it. We can see that it's a passport. Malone says,
South American seaman Emmanuel Charo aboard the Brazilian Queen. Well, I'll be.
First panel of the next page, we're approaching the portside bar. Obviously down by the docks there's a rat perched on a mooring post, which is quite a nice detail. Malone is walking up to the saloon-style doors, and his narration says,
I got a dead friend and sailors are beating on my head. I want answers, and they're on that ship.
We're inside the bar in the next panel. We see Malone talking to a crusty old sea dog with a cap and a blue jacket, a pint of beer in his hand, who obviously recognises Malone because he says, Maloney, how about a drink?
Later, I'm looking for the Brazilian Queen.
This prompts another sailor at the bar to say,
Has she got a sister?
Next panel is one of those maddening exterior shots which could have been used to further establish where they are before they go inside. And we see a boat on the river. We hear the old sailor saying from inside the bar, "She doesn't dock till 6 in the morning, but part of her crew and the head of the shipping line are ashore now."
Where are they staying?
"Well, at the Savoy," replies his friend. And as a slow dissolve, we see Malone standing, hiding in the shadows round the corner from the fancy glitzy hotel. His narration continues.
I didn't have to wait long for a familiar face. The heavy from Molly's place. And Bo Lester, narcotics kingpin. Now it starts to make sense.
And we see what Malone says. We can only really describe them as sort of pimpish looking guys in big hats with lots of chains and
very
big coats.
70s gangster look, isn't
Heavy
it?
70s gangster look.
Mm.
And Malone has obviously followed them into the building because we see them entering room number 806. In the foreground, we can see that Malone is interfering with the lock to room 808. There's a click as he manages to get it open. As he's doing this, he's saying,
"With a little luck, this place will be vacant."
In the next panel, we can see that he's making his way through the room, trying not to disturb the two guests who are asleep in their bed. As he opens a window, thinking,
"Shh, keep sleeping, folks. I just want to use your balcony."
Then he exclaims in his mind in the next panel,
"Cripes, there is no balcony."
Yes, and he's making his way along a very, very narrow window ledge, and he seems to be at least, indeed, well, obviously it's 808, so he's about 8 floors up. This is terrifying. Across from Malone's window ledge, though, is a balcony. The door to the balcony is open. From inside, we can hear voices. "The ship docks at 6. We'll make the switch then." And then, in the next panel, we see Malone make the leap from his narrow ledge onto the balcony, saying,
"Only one thing to do. Here goes."
From inside the room, we hear a voice saying,
"Are you sure it's top grade?"
Then another voice says, "Hold it." And a familiar figure, with a weird hat and a striped shirt, now wearing a blue jacket, steps out onto the balcony, saying, "Ah, look who it is. Just hanging around, man." To which Malone says,
"Help me up, leadhead, before you draw a crowd below."
See, in the next panel, Malone is being led in at gunpoint. And we can see that the chap who had the big blue hat in the earlier panel, he's sat down. We get a better look at him. He's taking his hat off. Magnificent, luxuriantly bouffant brown hair, neat moustache, striped shirt, blue tie, blue suit. His pal with the sideburns and the sunglasses and the green jacket, brown striped shirt, magnificent sideburns, and also the chauffeur. They're all standing there as our man who we met in the apartment earlier on herds Luke into the room. He's obviously searched Malone because he says, "He's clean, boss." To which Malone says,
"Sorry to drop in like this, but I was in the neighbourhood and..."
This prompts the guy in green to say, "I thought you got rid of him, Lopez."
"You mean like the number you did in the Champ?"
To which Lopez, who's the guy in blue and with the luxuriant bouffant, says,
"The Champ?"
His question is answered by his chauffeur, who's standing behind him, who says, "At the Spignali, Mr. Lopez."
See.
Malone gets a close-up in the next panel as he looks very much like Constantine indeed and says,
"I'm curious, Lopez. Why'd you have him killed? Or maybe..."
And as he's saying this, we see a gun butt flying into the panel to strike on the back of the head. There's a massive thud sound effect, and Malone's narration picks up again.
"I don't know how long I've been out, but I know I'm alive and in pain."
The next panel, we see Malone being bundled out of a car. They're obviously back down by the docks. We can see an establishment with the word Bates written and a large sign on the Golden Gate Bridge stretching out into the distance. Malone's narration picks up again.
"Now I'm thinking it might be better off if they put me out of my misery. But on second thought..."
There's a thud in the first panel of the next page as Malone drops to the ground at the feet of the other bad guy who's there. Our friend who we met at the start of the story, with the beanie hat and the striped shirt, clicks his machine gun, saying, "Stand back, man." And then he says in the next panel, "Look out, fool, he's feigning." And with that, Malone reaches around, grabs the leg of the other guy, and knocks him off his feet, saying,
"You mustn't go around cracking people in the head. They get upset."
Malone's back on his feet in the next panel as the bad guy with the beanie lets rip with his machine gun. There's a great brrr sound effect. In the nick of time, Malone has grabbed the other bad guy and uses him as a human shield. Prompting him to shout,
"No, Mondo, no!"
Yep, and the machine gun sound effect continues into the next panel as Malone rushes to the edge of the dock and it looks as though he's jumped into the water. Mondo, for that is he, with the beanie and the stripy shirt, smoke coming from the barrel of his gun, walks to the edge of the dock saying, "He's gone, but I got him, I think." And we see a rope in the foreground of the panel and we hear a sound effect and suddenly there is a crack and Mondo drops. Final panel of this page, we see a ripple in the water. Mondo's body is obviously fallen into the sea, and we see Malone balanced on the dock, smoke coming from his pistol as he says,
"Look out, Satan, the Iceman cometh."
That's quite a random thing to say, isn't it? Very dramatic shot of Malone in the first panel of the next page. Is that the moon behind him, or is it just some kind of random spotlight? Let's pretend it's the moon and we can all take a drink. Malone addresses us directly as he says,
"Now to pull myself together and wrap up this whole mess."
In the next panel, he's in a dodgy bar. We can see some dodgy bar staff and clientele in the background. I think I'll put this panel on Instagram. It's very amusing. Malone is holding the handset of the phone, but before he starts to speak, he says to the bartender,
"The usual bill, but in a clean glass."
He's also now put through to whoever it is he's calling as he says,
"Hello, Lieutenant Brody." "I don't care. Wake him up."
With another slow dissolve, we see a very cold-looking Malone standing with his arms folded, puffing on a cigarette. And we can see a large ocean liner, a large ship in front of him, which bears the legend, Brazilian Queen. Malone is saying to himself,
"Where are you, Brody?"
You can also see in front of the ship there's a very fancy, expensive limousine with a familiar-looking uniformed figure leaning against the car. Maloney's caption narration reads,
"That chauffeur. Something about him."
And the next panel, we hear the sudden wailing of police sirens as two cars arrive on the scene. The chauffeur whirls, and we see very conspicuously in his left hand some very obvious jewels and rings and stuff. He runs for it in the next panel, but Malone intercepts him, saying,
"Hold it right there. You're not leaving this party, Rufino. No way."
"What? What do you mean?" exclaims the chauffeur. Again, we see the conspicuous rings in his hand. Malone grabs his left wrist in the next panel, saying,
"Your love for jewelry is only surpassed by your knowledge of boxing. I should have picked it up when you called the champ Atlas, but it wasn't until I saw your ring that I knew for sure."
Brody has arrived on the scene, cigar in his gob. Malone bears the chauffeur, or Rufino, towards him, saying,
"A champion and his manager receive identical trophy rings. Now, Lieutenant, book Sam Rufino for the murder of Randy McNally."
To which Brody contributes, The next panel we see Rufino being spread over the side of the police car as Malone starts to take his leave, with Brody saying after him, "When are you going to stop interfering with police business, Malone?"
"First thing tomorrow, Brody."
There's a slow dissolve. We're back with Molly and Jill, and we see that Malone has been freshening up. He's taps off, as we say in Glasgow. He's got his shirt off. He's wiping himself down with a towel. And Molly is saying, "So Rufino had the mob thinking he was killed in the boat explosion, huh?"
"Yeah, Molly. Meanwhile, down south he made a fortune in smuggling. Then when he thought he was safe, he came back for the big deal, only to be spotted by the champ who believed him responsible for the death of his wife. That's why the champ was killed."
To keep him from spilling the beans. Molly reaches up to hug Malone in the next panel, saying, "I don't know how to thank you, Malone. The champ can rest at last." And then Jill leans in and kisses Malone on the cheek in the next panel, saying, "You're a doll, Malone. I know how to thank you." She sort of mumbles something in his ear. But then Malone seems to look at the camera as he says,
"Not now, Jill. I've got a headache."
And a very annoyed Jill puts her hands on her hips and says, "Why, I never..." To which Molly says, "I'm sure you have, dearie." And the caption reads,
The end. Well, that was saucy.
Yes. First thing I want to say is that it's just like Mike Ploug's artwork is phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Exceptional storytelling.
Yeah.
Across the board, but the people are also, they're almost caricatures.
Yeah.
I mean, some of his Man-Thing stuff's the same. He draws people in such a heightened, unrealistic, unnatural way.
Yeah.
But it's all consistent, so it all works.
It reminds me a lot of Frank Robbins, actually,
I know what you mean.
in this. It's very similar styles in the same era. I love that moment when he's out on the ledge and you're getting the top-down view.
Yes.
And it is... I counted them. He's on the 8th floor.
Yeah.
It's that attention to detail is fantastic. And it does look brilliant. It also reminds me a bit of Watchmen, actually.
I know what you mean.
Yes,
I
that
get
scene
that.
in the Watchmen, yeah.
Sure.
So, but yeah, it's great fun, yeah.
It's beautiful. I mean, there's lots of heavy blacks. It's a really dark, moody story. The opening image of the champ in the gutter is very striking. It rattles along. It really does. There's no unnecessary say what you see captioning. The dialogue and the positioning of all the figures tells the story all very nicely. It's all very good.
Yeah, lots of shadows. Actually, the inking in this is quite heavy as well,
Yeah,
but it suits the story, yeah.
Yeah, that was meaning when I was saying the heavy blacks and stuff. It's very, very good indeed. And as we say, just as you sort of said at the end, It gets a little bit PG-13, which is unusual for this podcast.
There you are. Mm-hmm. But another Manhunter, Luke
Yes.
Malone.
This could have easily fitted into that issue of Showcase that we read from ages ago.
It could have, yeah.
It feels very consistent. I mean, who's to say that this guy, couldn't be operating on another Earth in the T-Crisis DC multiverse? And some of it was a bit cliche, but I mean, I like the relationship he has with the older senior cop and all that sort of stuff. You wonder if there's how much of a history they sort of have with each other. Mm-hmm. And the ladies love him, obviously.
Of course. He's a chain smoker, a Mac-wearing detective in the 70s, of course.
That's where I've been going wrong my whole life.
Living in the wrong decade.
And not being a chain-smoking man-hunting person.
There we are. It's a huge cliche, but I loved the first-person narration. It was great fun.
Yeah, but also there's not an awful lot of it at the same time. It's only sort of there when it's necessary.
Yeah.
It's not like it's... Mm-hmm. The thing that I sort of admire most about it is almost the restraint of it all. It walks a thin line between like almost sort of parody of the sort of genre, which I think is slightly enhanced by Mike Plug's artwork, but at the same time it doesn't really get cliched at any point. You get the sense that he'd much rather, almost in some ways, that Malone would much rather be doing something else. Sometimes because it's I've got to deal with this. He feels almost like he feels obliged to it. I love just the detail when he's in the bar.
Yeah, the dive bar, and it's like the usual, but in a clean glass, of course.
And the red-haired woman sort of like giving him a saucy look from the bar. He's obviously very popular.
I did have a bit of a giggle at the title because it's very Police Squad.
Yes,
it's like Police Squad in colour. Tonight's episode, Requiem for a Champ.
Yes, I always laugh at that one, and of course they read the captions different to what gets read out. That's always a law. That's always a law.
It's hugely enjoyable. Yes, the only drawback in it really is the paper quality, the cheap printing of the time, which means it's not held up as well as some other comics. Yeah,
it's interesting. Like I think it may be just be the condition, the varying condition of some of the comics, the copies that I've got, but some of them seem to be in better nick than others. Like some of it feels almost like toilet paper quality, but then some of them are quite shiny.
Yeah,
I wonder if they were using cheaper papers that went on. But this is only issue 1.
Of course,
but there are some letters in issue 3.
There are.
Would you believe, listeners? I'm sure I used issue 3 on the Instagram comic cover challenge as well. There are obviously more Luke Malone stories in subsequent issues. Maybe if there's enough demand, we'll come back and do another Atlas episode when the Atlas comics all finish publishing. We'll do some of the legacy characters involved. Maybe we'll do that.
That's one thing we should mention, is the fact that the champ's name was Atlas.
That's very true. That's interesting.
And of course, as a segue as well, who was the first character to appear in the first issue special?
Yes, first issue special, which is imminent. And Peter is knee-deep in the planning for what we're going to do when we get to first issue special. Listeners, you will not believe your ears.
Let's count this as representing Atlas for first issue special this episode. There we are.
So the letters page in Police Action is called Police Blotter. Send all letters to Atlas Comics, care of Seaboard Periodical, 717 Fifth Avenue, New York, NY 10022. And a couple of letters. So just to give us all a taste of what people were saying about Atlas Comics, they're not all relevant to the story we've just done, but we're going to read a few of them. The first one goes like this.
Dear Larry, this is the way it was meant to be. 2 rough, tough, rock'em sock'em good guys in one issue. 2 of a kind for guys who like that kind of good guy winning stuff. Guys like me. Very often, a comic will come out with 2 completely different characters, totally unrelated to each other in style, locale, or even subject matter. I'm sure the purpose is one of high finance. If a fan doesn't buy the issue for character 1, then maybe he'll buy it for character 2. But here comes Police Action, with Sam Lomax, NYPD, and Luke Malone, Manhunter, back to back. The characters may be a bit cliche-ridden, but what TV crime drama isn't? I haven't felt this happy since last season when Cannon and Kojak were on back to back.
Superb.
So please don't break up the team. Please don't put some unrelated hero who can bend steel in his spider teeth in our time slot. Keep Police Action a genuine Crime Busters magazine. And that's from Barry Devlin from Spokane. WA. What's WA?
Washington.
Oh, Washington, of
Washington
course it is.
State.
Yes,
Right,
yes.
okay.
Of course. How foolish of me.
Gosh. Editorial response reads, that's exactly what Larry intends on doing, Barry. Police Action will remain a crime fighter's haven only. In this magazine, we plan to fuse the fast, pulpy action of the 30s with the more detailed TV-type plots of the 70s. So enjoy, Crime Busters, enjoy! That's optimistic, of course, because issue 3 is the last issue of Police Action. The next letter reads, greetings, Atlas. Here you are, a brand new comic company, and pow, zonk, you've got at least 20 or so new magazines published. It's amazing. I hope you haven't spread yourselves too thin. One thing I'm happy to see is the fact you're not afraid to try new types of comic mags. You've really got everything, from Planet Vampires to A Living Tree, open brackets, Morlock 2001, to Phoenix, an astronaut in 1977, to a title like Police Action. You're obviously not afraid of new concepts. Now, some may say that police action is nothing new, but it is. In a comic today, it's impossible to find this kind of story. It's a fair point, because let's be honest, DC and Marvel weren't close. We got was Lady Cop, and again, first issue special.
Yep.
It continues. So do us a favour, Atlas folks, keep up the good work and keep experimenting with new ideas. And that letter is from Mel Engels, Winnebago, Illinois. Interesting.
The editorial response says, the men behind Atlas, publishers Martin and Chip Goodman and editors Larry Lieber and Jeff Rovin, feel that the comic book audience should not be limited to superhero fans only. Also, having our heroes all over the map and scattered through the past, present and future leaves more room for creativity. No, Mel, we're not afraid to try something new. There we are.
Awesome.
And the next letter says, Dear Atlas, Yahoo! Competition! Who said the American system was finished? Now there are 3 big comic companies. I hope you can pull it off. Marvel was super for about 12 years and is now showing signs of age and disorder. National hasn't been marvellous in about 15 or so years. So I guess your timing is right. I just hope the economy is. By the way, I enjoyed issue 1 of Police Action to no end. I've also enjoyed Ironjaw, Wolf, Planet of Vampires, Scorpion and Phoenix. I won't go into detailing critical analysis at this time, but I had to drive approximately 400 miles to find them all. And there are others, like Grim Ghost and Morlock 2001, that I haven't been able to find at all. Now, everybody is not crazy like I am. If all your fans in America, and who knows where else, must drive 400 miles to buy 6 magazines, the gas shortage will get worse. Then the president would blame the comic book, and Congress would pass a law making comics illegal. Then everyone making comics in the whole country would have to go underground and grow beards and blah blah blah. So please, straighten out your distribution. And that's from Morris Tully, Sacramento, California.
Editorial response to Morris reads, we don't want a revolution. Besides, Rovin's not old enough to grow a beard. It says, grow a bear's. It actually says, good grief. Seriously, we're sorry for any inconvenience you may have suffered because of poor distribution. We're doing our best to remedy the situation, and we've just about got it licked. So in the future, you won't have any problems obtaining our books. Close brackets, we hope. No, they won't have any problems obtaining the books.
Because they won't publish any more.
The final letter then from Police Blotter reads, Larry, Police Action was reminiscent of the Golden Age police comics. It was also just as poorly done.
Gasp.
Sam Lomax was so poorly done so as to not be believed. Mike Sikowski has proved his inability to storytell, and Jack Younger's dialogue was another laugh-a-minute farce. Now for Luke Malone, Manhunter. Hilarious to no end. Mike Plug's bad script was exceeded only by his even worse pencils.
Gasp.
The whole mess was worsened by Frank Springer's bad inking. Apparently you're trying to cash in on the rough and tough type cop or investigator, a la TV's Mannix. Unfortunately, it's not going to work. That's from Mike Canuel, I'm guessing. Brooklyn, New York.
And there's no editorial response to that.
No, and indeed there are no more issues of Police Comics.
And it basically ends with the words, unfortunately, it's not going to work.
Yeah, it's interesting, some of the stuff that's being addressed in the letters page, because as I said earlier on, Atlas didn't really last very long at all.
No.
Much has been written about the whole saga. Again, this issue of Comic Book Artist, and I believe issue 127, the back issue, has some stuff about Atlas as well. What went wrong? Well, possibly, you know, it might have been, I don't know how much it contributed, but Martin Goodman hired Stan Lee's brother, Larry Lieber, who had no experience of black and white magazines, to run the Atlas titles in that format. And he hired Jeff Rovin, who had handled black and white magazines at Warren, to do the colour comics, instead of maybe putting them to work in the areas that would be more suited. As it was, Jeff didn't last the whole distance, and Larry ended up having to look after all of the comics. And from what we can see, even from the letter there, the comics are hampered by bad distribution, and anecdotal evidence suggests that the people who were buying them weren't impressed at the obvious similarities to what was being published elsewhere. Yeah. The covers to Atlas Comics even had an Atlas Comics banner that was along the top that was very, very close to the one that Marvel used at the time.
Yes.
Obviously, we talked about that in prep and stuff. And it seems that they were losing an awful lot of money on the whole project, and declining sales across the comics they did manage to get published led to Martin Goodman winding the whole thing up by the end of 1975.
Gasp.
Now, interestingly, one of the characters, the Scorpion, which was worked on by Howard Chaykin. Howard would rework his initial version of the Scorpion before it was rebooted in issue 3 as a weird superhero. He would reboot the Scorpion at Marvel Comics as the character Dominic Fortune, Brigand for Hire.
Yes.
And Demon Hunter, who made it to one issue, one of the last comics published by Atlas, who was created by Rich Buckler, future All-Star Squadron alumni, as it were. Demon Hunter also ended up at Marvel, refitted and recoloured as a character called Devil Slayer, who's fondly remembered by people like me as an occasional member of the Defenders.
And interestingly, the inverse of that really happened as well, because Reed Richards of Counter-Earth first appeared in Marvel Premiere 2, and he developed powers through cosmic rays, but instead of becoming stretchy, he became a kind of a purple hulkish character called The Brute.
Well then, that's interesting.
And he appeared in one of my favourite runs of FF. It was the 170s. It ran for a wee bit, written by Roy Thomas, and I think it might have had Rich Buckler art, Rick Holberg, or George Perez. It was written about that era.
Sure.
And yeah, it's great fun. Reed Richards of Counter-Earth is The Brute. Well, hey.
Interesting. And check out the socials this week, listeners, because I'm going to put an issue of Scorpion and the one issue of Demon Hunter side by side with the Marvel incarnations, just so you can see how similar they are. So earlier on, folks, I mentioned very briefly the Atlas superhero Tiger Man, who was the sort of other identity of a scientist called Dr. Lancaster Hill. Amazing.
Lancaster Hill was where Menswear played one of the first gigs.
It's where Rob from the Montrose Avenue tripped over when he was out on his skateboard. Lancaster Hill extrapolated a serum from the chromosomes of tigers to give himself tiger-like speed, strength and agility. It's worth pointing out that Steve Ditko and Wally Wood worked on the second and third issues, if you're into that sort of thing. Listeners, would it surprise you to know that there have been a number of different Tiger Men at DC Comics? Would it surprise you that they may be what we're talking about in our next episode?
Doesn't surprise me.
Doesn't surprise me.
So you get that to look forward to next week. But what did you think about this little diversion into Atlas Comics? Please get in touch and let us know. You can email us at earth2podcast@gmail.com. Make sure you follow us on the socials, because it's something very different this week, as David was saying.
Plenty.
Yes.
I've had stuff planned for years and years and years. There's so much stuff at the moment, listeners. I've had my phone for like 3 or 4 years. It's just falling out of my phone now because we're finally getting to post it.
Indeed. On Facebook and Instagram, we're at the Earth2 Podcast, and on Twitter, we're at podcast_Earth2, and it's the number 2 for all our socials.
Yes, folks, do get in touch and let us know if you have any favourite Atlas comic titles. If there's any stories you think we could maybe do a flashback or a follow-up Atlas episode on. But check out the socials, because there's going to be some original cover art. There's quite a few foreign Atlas covers that I've managed to track down.
Interesting.
Put a few on Instagram. I'll put a few more on Facebook. Got some house ads and stuff to post, all the usual. And as I always say at this point, if you enjoy what we do, please go to wherever it is you receive your podcast and give us a positive review. Make sure you tell your comic-minded pals. You can go to our coffee page and buy Peter the price of a beverage, as he sits in the lonely early hours in Cafe Nero, editing out all my fluffs and swearing.
Takes ages.
Sure does. But he's not had anything to do, actually, for a week or two, because we couldn't record last week, so I injured myself rather dramatically at work. But we have started working on our next Seven Soldiers epic. I think it's safe to say that at the moment. We've started recording elements for that. Brandon and Logan have already got their lines in as well. So that's the start. That's something to tease you with. Next week, we are dipping back into the archives for a rather unexpected portmanteau episode. We hope you will join us for it. On that bombshell,
I've been Peter.
I've been David. Take care. We'll see you next week on
the Earth2
Podcast.
Transmatter cube activated. Return coordinates set for Earth Prime.
And no one's seen them or McNally since. With that, we see one of the boxers falling through the ropes of the ring, very amusingly. I didn't take any of that exposition in, so let me just read that through again.